The train arrived on time. That was the first surprise, and in Delwood, Colorado in the September of 1887, surprises of any kind had grown scarce enough. The three men sitting outside the hardware store actually looked up from their boots when the whistle sounded. The second surprise stepped off the third car. She was not what a town like Delwood expected when it heard the words, "Mail order bride." Those words conjured something softer, something arriving with hope worn openly on its face, like a Sunday dress put on for strangers. This woman wore no such thing. She wore a traveling suit the color of old wood mended at both cuffs, and she carried a single valise that was not large enough to hold a life, but seemed to hold exactly what she had decided to keep of one. She stood on the platform and looked at the empty space where someone should have been standing, and her expression did not change. Not disappointment, not relief. Something more controlled than either. The expression of a person who had long ago stopped being surprised by the specific shape that absence chose to take. Her name was Wren Calloway. She was 30 years old. She had taken 4 days on 3 trains to reach this place, and not once in those 4 days had she been certain she was doing the right thing, which was precisely why she had stopped asking herself the question somewhere outside of Kansas City and focused instead on the arithmetic of what she had left and what she needed and what a woman in her position could reasonably expect from the world as it actually existed, rather than as anyone had ever promised her it would be. The platform cleared quickly. Families' reunited crates were loaded. The station master retreated to his window. The train shuddered and pulled away, and Wren stood in the settling dust and read the sign nailed to the platform post, "Delwood Pop." 340. She read it twice, not because she had missed anything the first time, but because the habit of reading things carefully had served her better than most other habits she had tried. Then she picked up her valise and went to find someone who could tell her which direction to walk. The man behind the ticket window had the wariness of someone who had lived long enough in a small place to know that strangers represented either opportunity or trouble, and experience had taught him these arrived in roughly equal proportion. He looked at Wren over the top of his reading spectacles and answered her question about the Colburn Ranch with the careful neutrality of a man who knew something he was not entirely sure she knew and who had not yet decided whether telling her would be a kindness or a complication. "Southeast," he said. "Follow the main road out past the mill, then take the left fork at the Cottonwood. You'll see the fence line about a mile in." "How far in total?" "2 miles, maybe a little more." She thanked him. He watched her go with the look of a man composing in his head exactly what he would say about this when his wife asked him about his day. Wren walked. The road out of Delwood told her more about this place than any conversation could have. The earth was the color of dried brick, cracked along old seams where water had been and was no longer. The grass on either side had given up some time ago, and now existed in a kind of gray persistence, still technically present, but no longer pretending to be anything you could call alive. The sky above was enormous and cloudless, and a blue so deep it looked almost aggressive, the way beautiful things sometimes do when they appear alongside suffering. A hawk turned slow circles high up, riding something invisible patient, in the way that only creatures with very simple requirements can afford to be. She passed the mill, which was not operating. She found the cottonwood, which was the largest living thing she had seen since the train crossed into Colorado, and looked at it for a moment with the appreciation of someone who understood now what it had cost that tree to survive here. Then she took the left fork. The fence line appeared exactly where the man had said it would. Beyond it, the land opened into a stretch of dry pasture that had probably been something close to beautiful in a wetter year. There was a barn that leaned slightly to the north, compensating for prevailing winds, with the resignation of something that had been compensating for a long time. A garden plot near the house showed the geometric ambition of someone who planned carefully, and the wilted reality of land that had not cooperated. The house itself was 2 stories of weathered pine, with a covered porch solid in the way that hand-built things are solid, every board placed by someone who intended to live with his own work. Wren stood at the gate and looked at all of this with the same methodical attention she had given the platform sign. She had read his letters 6 times before responding to the first one. She had written out her 3 conditions in her clearest hand, and read them again before sealing the envelope, because she had learned in the particular school that life had put her through that clarity at the beginning of an arrangement was the only reliable insurance against confusion at the end of one. Seth Colburn had written back within 2 weeks, accepted all 3 conditions without argument or amendment, and asked one question of his own, whether she was coming because she wanted to, or because she had to. She had sat with that question for 3 days before answering it, which was itself an answer of a kind. And what she had finally written was this: I am coming because I have assessed my options and chosen the one that makes the most sense. I want it to make sense. I believe that is close enough to wanting it. He had not written back for a week, and she had begun to wonder if she had been too honest. Then his response arrived, and it said only, that is close enough for me too. She had kept that letter. It was in the valise. The sound that brought him to the door was not the gate which she had opened quietly, but her footsteps on the porch boards, which announced themselves with the dry creak of wood that had absorbed too many seasons. He came through the door and stopped. He was taller than she had imagined, which was not a criticism, only a fact that required a brief adjustment. His hair was the iron gray of a man who had not gone gray all at once, but gradually, the way most difficult things happen, and his face carried the evidence of long years outdoors without apology or vanity. He was broad through the shoulders in the way of men who had worked with their bodies rather than been born to it. The kind of broad that meant something had been built and maintained rather than simply received. His hands, which she noticed because she had always noticed hands, were the hands of someone who had done things with them that mattered. He looked at her, and something happened in his face that she did not have a name for immediately. It was not attraction, or not only that. It was not recognition, since they had never met. It was something closer to the expression of a man who has stepped outside expecting one season and found another, and who has not yet decided if this is better or worse than what he prepared for. His eyes, which were the gray-green of shallow water over stone, went somewhere else for just a moment. Not through her, around her, into something behind the present that only he could see. Then it passed. He looked at her directly, the way a man looks at someone when he is making himself do so. "You're Wren Calloway," he said. "I am. The train was on time." "I know." He paused. The pause had weight. I was held up. So I gathered. She did not say it sharply. She did not say it gently. She said it the way she said most things, as a simple transmission of information, and set her valise down on the porch between them. I'd like to know what held you up, she said. Not because I require an apology, because I require an explanation. He looked at her for another moment, and she had the sense he was recalibrating something. Then he stepped back from the door and held it open. "Come in," he said. "I'll make coffee." The inside of the house was the inside of a life lived without an audience. There was no ornamentation for the sake of it, no evidence that anyone had considered how the room might appear to a visitor, which meant it appeared exactly as it was. A table of good pine scarred by use, 2 chairs that did not match but occupied the same space without apparent conflict. A shelf of books she counted 12 out of habit, arranged with the casual precision of someone who returned things to the same place, not out of tidiness but out of the deeper order of a mind that knew where it had left things and needed them to be there. No photographs on the wall. She noticed. She did not ask. The stove was clean and the coffee was old, and he remade it without comment, moving through the kitchen with the economy of a person who had performed these actions alone long enough that they had stopped requiring thought. She sat at the table. She watched his hands. She did not look away when he glanced over, because she had decided somewhere between the cottonwood and the porch that she was not going to manage this situation by performing smallness. He set a cup in front of her and sat across the table and told her. His name was Seth Colburn. He was 55 years old. He had owned this ranch for 8 years, since buying it at public auction after the previous owner died without heirs. A purchase made through the county office and fully documented the deed, signed by the county clerk himself and witnessed by 2 men who still lived in Delwood and could confirm everything. Among the land he had purchased was the western parcel, the one that ran along the dry creek bed toward the hills, and on that parcel was a well. Not just any well. A well fed by a deep aquifer that did not depend on surface rainfall. A well that had water in it right now today when the creek had been dry for 7 months, and the other 3 wells in the county had dropped to less than 2 feet. A well that in a drought that had been grinding this region down for 3 years was the most valuable piece of ground in the county, and possibly in 2 counties beyond it. And this morning, before the sun was fully up, a man named Harlan Voss had come to Seth's door with a folder of papers, and a manner that was polite, in the specific way that people are polite when they are trying to make you understand. That politeness is a choice they are making and could just as easily stop making, and he had informed Seth that the original sale of the western parcel had been conducted with fraudulent documentation, and that he was pursuing a legal remedy through the county court that would, among other things, place Seth's right to the property in question, pending investigation. "Fraudulent how?" Wren asked. "He says the survey documentation was falsified, that the land was misrepresented in the auction materials." "Was it?" Seth looked at her steadily. "No. You say that like a man telling the truth. I say it like a man who knows what he bought and how he bought it and can prove both. Then why couldn't you come to the station?" He picked up his coffee cup, set it down. The gesture was not evasion, but the movement of someone buying themselves a moment to say something accurately. "Because Voss didn't just come with papers," he said. "He came with the implication that he'd also filed a motion to suspend any civil contracts I'd entered into recently pending the outcome of the property investigation, including the marriage arrangement. The word arrangement landed between them without ceremony. That was what it was. They had both said so in their letters, and she had appreciated the honesty of it. "He can do that," she said. "The court can if he convinces them there's cause. It'd be temporary. But—" He stopped. "But it would send me back to where I came from." "Yes." Wren looked at her coffee. The cup was tin. The coffee was black, and it had been made by a man who was not delicate about such things. She drank it. "Tell me about Harlan Voss," she said. She learned about Harlan Voss the way she had learned most important things in her life. Not from a single source, but by moving through a place and paying attention to the texture of how people behaved in relation to a subject. Seth told her the facts. He was measured about it, which she respected, because measured people tended to be accurate people. And accuracy was more useful to her right now than passion. Voss had come to Delwood 3 years ago, appointed as deputy by a county sheriff who spent most of his time in the larger town, 20 miles north. In the absence of the sheriff, Voss had become the most effective authority in Delwood, which was a different thing from the most legitimate authority. And he had spent those 3 years building the kind of influence that did not depend on anyone's permission. He had business interests in the town. He had social debts carefully distributed. He had the intelligence of a man who understood that the real levers of a small place were not the official ones. Seth told her all of this plainly, and without obvious bitterness, the way a man describes a weather pattern. Here is what it does. Here is what it has done. Here is what it is likely to do. The bitterness she suspected was there, but he kept it somewhere below the waterline. After Seth, she learned from the town itself. She had told him she would stay at the hotel or boarding house while the legal matter was pending, which was the right thing to say for a number of reasons, and he had not argued with her, which she noted. She had found her way to Cora Finch's boarding house on the east side of the main road, a 2-story building with a garden that had survived the drought better than most, because Cora had given it water from her own ration without advertising the fact. And she had asked for a room and received one, and paid for it from the money she had kept separate in the inside pocket of her valise, because she had not been willing to arrive anywhere without money that was hers. She had paid for her own train ticket too, the same way from money she had earned by her own work before any of this. Seth had offered to send funds. She had written back that she appreciated the offer and was declining it, and he had accepted her declination with what she had read in his brief response as something close to respect. She had not been entirely certain. Now, having met him, she thought she had read it correctly. In the afternoon, she walked the main street of Delwood slowly, and without apparent purpose, the way she had learned to do when she was trying to learn a place. She went into the general store and bought a small paper of salt and asked the woman behind the counter how long the drought had been this bad. She sat outside the post office for a while and watched who spoke to whom and who crossed to the other side of the road. She listened to conversations not directed at her with the mild, unfocused expression of someone resting her feet. She had done all of this in Philadelphia too, after her husband died, and the men came with the ledgers and the news that the numbers did not add up and had not added up for longer than she had been aware of. She had walked that city the same way, learning the shape of her situation from every direction, because she had found that a situation understood from every direction was a situation you could actually move through, whereas a situation understood from only one direction was a wall you kept running into. What she learned about Harlan Voss in Delwood that afternoon, she learned less from what people said than from what they did with their bodies when his name was introduced into a conversation. The woman in the general store went still in a way that was not stillness but held movement. Two men she passed near the barber shop lowered their voices when she walked by them, and she caught the name once and caught also the reflexive glance toward the building that served as Voss's office, the way you might glance at a window to check if someone was watching. A child of about 8 ran across the main road without looking and was yanked back by her mother, who scolded her and whose eyes during the scolding were elsewhere entirely. A town that moved like that around a man's name was a town that had been educated. She was thinking about this when a voice to her right said, "You walked from the station." She turned. He was standing at the edge of the post office steps, which meant he had been there when she sat down, and had not introduced himself then, which meant this was not an accidental meeting. He was maybe 45, dressed in clothes that were better quality than the climate or the company warranted, with the kind of careful grooming that announced itself as deliberate. His boots were exceptional. She noticed boots. His name, he told her, was Ezra Tull. He was from Denver. He was conducting an investigation related to a property dispute in the county, which was as much as he was prepared to say about that at present. He said all of this in a tone of such reasonable openness that it sounded like the most natural introduction in the world while containing almost no information. She looked at him with the expression she had developed for lawyers, which this man had something of about him, though she could not yet place exactly what. "Miss Calloway," he said, "you've arrived at an interesting time." "I seem to keep doing that," she said. He smiled. The smile was a tool. "I'd simply say," he continued, "that not everything you'll hear about Seth Colburn in this town will be accurate, and not everything you'll hear about the man who's opposing him will be either. The space between what's said and what's true is where things actually live in a place like this." "That's true of most places," she said. He inclined his head. Something shifted in his assessment of her. She watched it shift. "If you'd be open to a conversation in the next day or two," he said, "I believe I have information that would be useful to you." "Useful to me or useful to Seth Colburn?" "With some luck, Sid," he said, "both." He touched the brim of his hat. "Enjoy the evening, Miss Calloway." He walked away and she watched him go, and she did not think about his information. She thought about his boots, which were new enough that the soles were barely worn, which meant he had not been in Delwood long. And she thought about the way he had used her name twice without being given it. Cora Finch set a bowl of soup in front of her without asking if she wanted it, which Wren took as a good sign. Women who fed you without asking tended to be either dangerous or trustworthy, and Cora had the face of a woman who had arrived at trustworthiness by way of a very long road and several wrong turns, which was the most reliable kind. The boarding house kitchen was the warmest room in the building, with a stove that Cora kept fed, with the competence of a woman who had been keeping things alive through stubbornness for a long time. The table was old oak heavy, the kind of table that does not move regardless of what happens around it. Cora sat down across from her with her own bowl, and they ate for a few minutes without speaking, which was comfortable in the way that silence between two people of similar temperament tends to be. Seth Colburn didn't come to the station, Cora said eventually. It was not a question. He explained why. Cora ate. He's a careful man, not in the way that means he hesitates, but in the way that means he doesn't do things without knowing why he's doing them. That sounds like a recommendation. It's an observation. I don't make recommendations about other people's lives. I've found it's not appreciated. Wren looked at her. What would you say if I asked you what I ought to know about this town before I decide whether to stay? Cora considered this with the seriousness it deserved. I'd say Delwood is a town that's been scared for long enough that it's started to mistake the scared feeling for normal. That happens to places the same way it happens to people. She paused. And I'd say that the man doing most of the scaring is smart enough to know that you don't have to threaten people directly. You only have to be present and let them draw the right conclusions. Harlan Voss. Cora looked at her. You're quick. I walked the street this afternoon. People show you that much just walking. People show you everything, Wren said. Most of the time, they don't know they're doing it. Cora was quiet for a moment. She had the look of a woman revising her initial estimate of something. Seth Colburn, she said, has been in Delwood for 8 years. He built that fence line himself first year. Set every post. In 3 years of drought, he's kept his animals alive and his land maintained, and hasn't asked anyone for a thing which in this town means he has no debts and no allies. She looked at her soup. That's a hard position to be in when someone decides to come for what you've built. Why is Voss coming for it now? The well, Cora said. It was always gonna come to the well. Seth said the aquifer doesn't depend on rainfall. It doesn't. I've had water from it delivered here twice this summer when my own ran too low. Paid for it fair. But there's other folks in this county who are struggling badly enough that the man who controls that water controls something more important than water. She looked directly at Wren. You understand what I'm saying? I understand. Power that depends on other people's need, Cora said, is a specific kind of power. It requires other people to keep needing. Wren finished her soup, set the spoon down precisely. Outside, the evening wind had come up, the kind of dry wind that moved through the valley most nights, now carrying nothing useful but moving things around regardless. What do you know about Seth before this place? Wren asked. Cora picked up the bowls and carried them to the sink. Not much, she said with her back turned. He doesn't talk about it. But there's things a woman who runs a boarding house sees over years that she doesn't need to be told directly. Such as, Cora turned back around. She had the measured expression of someone deciding exactly how much truth was a kindness and how much was an imposition. A man who lives alone by choice, she said, carefully. And a man who lives alone because someone made him understand that letting people in leads to a particular kind of damage. They look the same from a distance, but they're not the same at all. Seth Colburn isn't alone because he prefers it. Wren said nothing. She sat with that for a moment, turning it over. He asked me something in his letters, she said finally. He asked whether I was coming because I wanted to or because I had to. What did you tell him? I told him I'd chosen this because it made the most sense of my options. Cora looked at her. And was that the truth? It was an accurate statement. Cora folded the dishcloth. There's a difference. I know. Do you want to know what I'd ask you if I were the sort of person who asked? Wren looked at her. Go ahead. Whether you came here wanting stability, Cora said, or wanting something real, because those are different destinations. And Delwood's a long way to travel to end up with the wrong one. Wren did not answer immediately. She sat with the question the way she had sat with Seth's question alone, in a rented room in Philadelphia with the ledgers stacked in the corner, and the future arranged in front of her like an arithmetic problem she had not yet solved. She had an answer for Cora. She was not sure yet if it was the right one. I'll let you know, she said. Later in the room, Cora had given her small clean the window facing east toward nothing for a long way. Wren sat on the edge of the bed with her valise open beside her and took out the small bundle of letters. Seth's letters. She had kept them in order, tied with the same plain string they had accumulated over 4 months. And she did not read them now, because she did not need to. She knew what they said. What she was looking for was something else. She untied the string and went through to the second letter, the one that had made her decide to respond seriously rather than continue her cautious evaluation. And she smoothed it on her knee and looked at the particular passage she had read more times than she had intended. He had written about the land. He had described the well not with pride, which would have been tiresome, but with the specific unglamorous attention of someone describing a thing they genuinely understood. He had written about the aquifer, about the geological formation that made it independent of surface conditions, about the survey he had commissioned before the auction, because he had suspected what was there and wanted to know before he committed to anything. He had written, I paid more for the survey than I paid for the land, and I paid fair for the land. A man who pays for information before he pays for what the information is about is a man who respects the thing he's doing. She had read that passage and thought, this is a man who does not guess. She had written back for the first time that same evening. Now she folded the letter and put it back with the others and retied the string and set them in the valise beneath the spare blouse and the small leather notebook she used for arithmetic, and the other smaller envelope, the one she had not opened since the day she sealed it, which contained the 3 conditions she had set and which Seth had accepted, and which she had written on the outside in her own hand, terms agreed. She had brought it as evidence. She brought things as evidence. She had learned that from the ledgers. Outside, the dry wind moved through Delwood without comfort or purpose. The stars over Colorado were the kind of stars you only got away from cities impractical in their abundance, almost too much of a good thing. She looked at them through the window for a while without assigning them any meaning, because she had found that assigning meaning to things that were simply large and indifferent was a way of making yourself feel important, that the universe did not actually support. She thought about Seth Colburn's face when he had opened the door, the thing that had passed through it and gone. She thought about Ezra Tull's boots. She thought about what Cora had asked her. And she thought about what the true answer might be. And she thought about the fact that she had spent 4 months designing this arrangement to be survivable, regardless of what it turned out to be. And she thought about whether designing something to be survivable was the same as believing in it. And she did not arrive at a conclusion, because the question was not the kind that arrived at conclusions. It was the kind that traveled. She lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling and let herself be tired for a while, which was a thing she did not always allow herself to do. Tomorrow she would go back to Seth Colburn's ranch. She would look at this problem from every direction. She had told him she required an explanation, and she had received one. And now she needed to understand what the explanation meant for the arithmetic of what she had left, and what she was building, and what a woman who had arrived in a drought with a valise full of careful decisions could reasonably do about a man named Harlan Voss. She thought just before sleep, the well doesn't depend on the rain. She thought it was probably about more than the well. She did not know yet that she was right, and in what precise way and what it was going to cost all of them before the reckoning settled. She only knew that she had not come 4 days on 3 trains to sit in a boarding house waiting for men to decide things. The stars were still there when she fell asleep doing what they always did, enormous and unchanged, and entirely indifferent to the small arithmetic of her plans. In the morning she would begin. She was up before the light was fully decided. This was not discipline, or not only that. It was the habit of the last 3 years, which had been years of needing to be awake before problems found her, rather than the other way around. Problems that found you while you were still horizontal had a way of defining the day on their own terms. Wren had decided some time ago that she preferred to define her own days. She dressed in the gray half-light, washed her face with the water from the pitcher Cora had left, and sat at the small desk under the east window with her leather notebook open. Outside, Delwood was doing the slow work of becoming itself again after the night. A rooster somewhere unnecessary. The first wagon on the road. The sound of the well pump behind the boarding house, which Cora worked herself every morning at this hour, drawing up what the aquifer had refilled overnight. Wren wrote, not a diary. She did not keep a diary, having found that writing about feelings tended to give them more structural integrity than they deserved. What she wrote in the notebook was arithmetic, the shape of what she knew, the shape of what she needed to know, and the gap between them rendered as clearly as she could manage. She had filled 3 such notebooks since her husband died. They were not sentimental documents. They were the working papers of a person trying to understand where she stood. What she knew, Seth Colburn had purchased the western parcel legally and completely in 1879. The county clerk had signed the deed. 2 witnesses existed. The well on that parcel was the most significant water source remaining in the county after 3 years of drought. What she knew about Harlan Voss, he had arrived 3 years ago. He had lost the auction for that same land 8 years before he arrived. He had spent 3 years consolidating influence in a town that had no one with enough independence to resist him. What she needed to know what specifically Voss claimed was fraudulent in the documentation. Whether his claim had any legal substance or was purely tactical. What the county court was likely to do and on what timeline. And what Ezra Tull actually knew and why he was here, and what his boots meant about the length of his stay. She closed the notebook, went down to find Cora. Breakfast at Cora's table was the first real food she had eaten since the train, and she ate it with the focused appreciation of a person who understood that the body's requirements were not optional, regardless of the mind's preoccupations. Cora cooked without ceremony and ate standing at the counter, which was her preference, and they did not speak much, which was also her preference, and Wren found she did not mind. There was a companionable quality to Cora's silences. They were not the silences of a person waiting for you to say something. They were the silences of a person who had arrived at a sufficient relationship with quiet. Wren asked her where the county clerk's office was. "You're going to look at the deed records," Cora said. It was not a question. "I'd like to see what Voss is claiming and what the actual documentation shows. The clerk's name is Aldous Prentice. He's a nervous man. He won't talk to you directly about a pending legal matter. But he will get flustered if you ask him the right questions, and flustered people show you things that calm people don't." She paused. "His wife takes coffee at the general store most mornings around 9. She's more direct than he is. More useful then. Her name is Margaret. She likes it when people use her name." Wren noted this. She finished her coffee, thanked Cora, and went out. The morning air had the sharp cold of high desert early hours, the kind that would seem impossible by afternoon. She walked the main road with her hands in her jacket pockets and her notebook against her ribs, and looked at everything the town showed her in daylight that it had hidden in the previous afternoon's weariness. Delwood was a town that had been planned optimistically. The width of the main road suggested that someone once had imagined more traffic than would ever actually come. The empty lot between the barber shop and the dry goods store still had the post holes from a building that had been started and abandoned, the posts themselves long since repurposed for something more immediate. There was a church that had been repainted recently and a school that had not, which told you something about how the town ordered its priorities, or perhaps only about who had more energy left. She found Margaret Prentice at the general store at 5 minutes past 9, which showed a pleasant reliability, and she ordered coffee for both of them and sat down and used the woman's name twice in the first 2 minutes, and asked about the drought, which was what everyone in Delwood wanted to talk about because it was the thing most on their minds and the thing most visitors knew least about, and the combination made for the relief of being the expert in a conversation. Margaret Prentice talked about the drought for 11 minutes. In that 11 minutes, she mentioned, among other things, the auction of 1879, which she had attended, because her husband attended. And she generally attended the things her husband attended so that she could correct his account of them afterward. She remembered it because of the disagreement at the end, which was not the word she used. She said, the unpleasantness, when the man who had come down from the mining operation near Pueblo lost out to the rancher and was quite loud about it in front of the county clerk, who was embarrassed. That man, she recalled, had very good boots and had left Delwood that evening in a temper. Wren asked her what the man's name had been. Margaret Prentice looked at her coffee. "I don't recall it exactly," which meant she did. Wren thanked her, used her name again, and went to find the county clerk's office. Aldous Prentice was precisely as described. He was a small man with the large desk of a person who used furniture to compensate for what he felt he lacked in natural authority. And when Wren walked in and asked to see the land auction records from 1879, he looked at her with the expression of a man calculating risk in real time. "Those records," he said carefully, "relate to a matter currently under—" "I'm not asking about the current matter," she said. "I'm asking about the original public auction record, which is a public document. The auction itself occurred 8 years ago and is not under any pending action." He looked at her. He looked at the door, which was closed. He looked at his desk. "The survey documentation," she said, "filed at the time of purchase, Is it in the original record? Something happened in his face that was not quite an answer, and not quite a refusal. It was the expression of a man who understood that the question itself had a right answer, and that he was being asked to either provide it or deny it. And either action had consequences he was still computing. The survey, he said, was conducted by a Mr. Hargreave out of Colorado Springs. The results were filed with the county on the 14th of March, 1879. The deed was issued on the 22nd. And those documents are in the original record. They are. Thank you, she said. She wrote nothing in front of him. She turned and walked out. On the street, she wrote in her notebook, "Survey existed. Predated the deed. Cannot be retroactively falsified without falsifying the original county record, which Prentice himself maintains." She thought about this for a moment. Then she wrote, "Voss's claim cannot hold on the survey documentation," which means the claim is not about the documents. It's about something else. Find the something else. She put the notebook away and went back to the boarding house to change her shoes, because she intended to walk out to Seth Colburn's ranch, and she was going to do it in boots that made sense for the terrain, and she had anticipating something like this packed accordingly. He was mending fence when she arrived, which was not the dramatic setting for a conversation, but was the actual setting, and she walked up to him along the fence line without announcing herself, because she could see him and he could hear her footsteps, and there was no need for theater. He looked up when she was close enough, and the wariness in his face when he registered who was approaching was different from the previous day's wariness. It was not the wariness of a man seeing a stranger. She told him what she had learned. She did it concisely in the order she had learned it without editorializing, and he listened the same way without interrupting, without the nervous interjections of a person who was formulating his response before you finished. He listened the way people listen when they intend to use what they hear. When she finished, he drove the fence staple he was holding into the post, looked at it and said, "He knows the survey is clean." "Yes. So the claim is about something else." "That's what I wrote down." He looked at her. Something in the look was more direct than the previous day, which had itself been fairly direct. "You wrote it down," he said. She took the notebook from her jacket pocket and opened it to the relevant page and handed it to him. He read it. He read it again. He handed it back. "The water rights documentation," he said, "separate from the deed. There was a separate filing for the water rights because the well predated the ranch by about 30 years. It was dug by the original homesteader. That filing is with the territorial records in Denver, not with the county. Harder to verify quickly. Slower process. More expensive to contest, but also more expensive to defend." "He's not trying to win," she said. "He's trying to make it expensive to resist." Seth looked at the fence. It was a very well-constructed fence. She could see in the straightness of the posts and the tension of the wire that he had built it to last, which was the kind of thing you did when you believed in the permanence of what you were protecting. "I have something to show you," he said. He set down his tools. "Come." They walked west. The ground changed as they moved away from the main buildings, got harder, more mineral, the grass thinner, until it was more suggestion than presence. The hills rose in the distance, with the flat impassivity of things that have been there, long enough to stop noticing human activity. The sky above was the same excessive blue as the day before. He took her to the well. It was not what she had expected from a well that was becoming the center of a legal conflict. It was not impressive in any visible way. It was a circle of dressed sandstone, maybe 4 feet in diameter, with a timber crosspiece and a rope and a wooden bucket, situated in the middle of an open field with no particular drama about it. The rope was in good condition. The stones were set with the same careful evenness she had noticed in the fence. He took the rope and lowered the bucket. She listened to it go down, counting unconsciously, and then heard the sound of water. A solid, definite sound, not the hollow near miss of a well running low, but the sound of something that was genuinely there. He cranked it up. The bucket was full. The water in it was clear and cold-looking, and he poured a small amount into the tin cup he had clipped to the crosspiece and held it out. She drank. It was, in fact, cold. In September, in a drought in a place where water had become a daily calculation. For most people, the coldness of it was remarkable in a way that plain cold water rarely was. The aquifer runs about 40 feet below the surface here, he said. The formation it sits in is sandstone. It holds water slowly and releases it slowly, independent of what the surface does. I had a geologist from Colorado Springs map the extent of it before I committed to the purchase. 800 acres of formation, maybe more. It doesn't drop noticeably unless you're drawing from it faster than it refills. And to do that, you'd need equipment no one in this county has. How long have you known what it was? I suspected before the auction. I hired the geologist for 3 days to survey it before I made any commitment. He looked at the well. I paid him $70, which was more than I had easily available at the time. You borrowed it. I had it. I just didn't have it easily. He paused. It was the right expenditure. She took out her notebook and wrote $70 for Survey 1879. Pre-auction. She wrote it not because she would forget, but because writing it made it part of the record, and records were what you had when memory became contested. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced 2 pieces of dried apple. He held one toward her without looking at her in the same way you might offer something to a person you've been working alongside for a while, rather than someone you were still in the process of meeting. She took it. They sat on the stone edge of the well, not beside each other exactly, but not separated either, and ate the dried apple in the dry air. And the sun was lowering toward the western hills, and a hawk turned in the middle distance, doing its slow and necessary work. Nothing required saying for a few minutes, and nothing was said. He broke the quiet eventually, not with purpose, but the way things sometimes surface when there's nothing pressing them down. I bought my first piece of land for someone, he said. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the well or past it. A long time ago. A different place. She did not respond immediately. She understood that this kind of beginning required room. That land's still there, he said. I don't know who has it now. He stopped. Seemed to decide something about how far to go. She didn't stay. The person I bought it for. I'm sorry, Wren said. Don't be, it was a long time ago. He picked up a small stone and turned it in his fingers. I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you because you asked yesterday why I came to Delwood, specifically, and I didn't answer. And the answer is that I came here because the land was right, and I wanted to be somewhere that was only mine. No history attached to it. No. He stopped again, set the stone down. I found that when you choose a place because it has no history, you make your own, and then it's yours in a different way, a harder way to let go of. She thought about what Cora had said. A man who lives alone because someone made him understand that letting people in leads to a particular kind of damage. She looked at the well and thought that she understood something about it, now that she had not when she arrived at its edge. It was not only water. It was the evidence of a decision made carefully, expensively by a man who had decided to build something that would hold. She took the piece of folded paper from her jacket pocket, the one she had written that morning with the survey findings, the timeline, the clean summary of what Voss could and could not claim, and set it on the stone beside him without comment. Not offered. Just placed there. He looked at it, looked at her. He picked it up and read it, and did not say anything for a moment. "You didn't need to do this," he said. "I know. Why did you?" She looked at the distant hills. The light was going amber now, the way high desert light went in the late afternoon. Everything turning the color of old brass. "I read your second letter 8 times, she said. "Not your first. Your second, which is when you wrote about the well and what it cost you to know what you had before you committed to anything. I read it 8 times and then I wrote you back for the first time." She paused. "I don't do things 8 times unless they mean something." He was quiet beside her. The hawk made one more long circle and then went somewhere else. "I've been alone a long time," he said. Not as a complaint, as a fact that required stating accurately. "So have I," she said, "in different ways." They stayed there until the light went low and the air turned cool, and then they walked back to the ranch house, and she took the road back to Delwood before full dark, and neither of them mentioned what had or hadn't been said at the well, because some things don't need to be mentioned to be real. Harlan Voss came to see her the following morning. This was not a surprise exactly, though the timing was precise enough to suggest he had been watching for her return. He was waiting outside the boarding house when she came downstairs just after 8, standing in the morning shadow of the porch, dressed with the meticulous care that she had come to understand was not about appearance, but about message. A man who wore a vest in September drought weather was communicating something about his relationship to the normal requirements of circumstances. He was older than she had constructed him in her mind, maybe 60, with the preservation of men who live carefully and sleep well, which is to say, the preservation of men who are not much troubled by what they do. His face was angular, well-featured in a way that must have been striking once and was now merely precise. His eyes were the color of something you couldn't quite name, and they assessed her in the way that made her understand immediately why people in this town dropped their voices. "Miss Calloway," he said, not loudly. He had the voice of someone who had learned that speaking quietly made people lean in, and that people who leaned in were people who were already in some small way coming toward you. "I hope Delwood has been welcoming." "It's been educational," she said. The smile that moved across his face was brief and knowing. You've been busy. I generally am. I understand you visited the clerk's office yesterday. Public records, she said. Open to anyone. Naturally. He put his hands in his jacket pockets, an easy gesture relaxed. Nothing about him suggested threat, which was itself the threat. I want you to know that my dispute with Mr. Colburn is not personal. It's a legal matter concerning documentation that was, I have reason to believe, not entirely in order at the time of the sale. What reason? He looked at her steadily. I beg your pardon. You said you have reason to believe the documentation was not in order. I'm asking what the reason is. He was quiet for a moment. It was a different kind of quiet than Seth's. Seth's silences were the silences of someone choosing accuracy. Voss's silence was the silence of someone accustomed to the fact that he rarely needed to justify himself, and who was now experiencing the mild novelty of being asked to. That's a matter for the court, he said finally. Of course. She looked at him with the level attention she had given his file in her mind since the day before. Mr. Voss, may I ask you something? Please. You attended the auction in 1879. He did not react visibly. Slightly impressive, she thought. I looked at many properties during that period. You made a bid on the western parcel. I may have. I don't recall every transaction from that period. The county clerk's wife remembers you quite specifically, Wren said. She described your boots. Something moved behind his eyes that was not readable as anything specific, which itself told her something. I wonder, he said pleasantly, if you're aware that pursuing an active legal matter on behalf of someone with a personal stake in the outcome could constitute. I'm not pursuing anything on behalf of anyone, she said. I'm a woman asking questions in a town where I've come to live. I find that's generally permitted. He looked at her for a moment that lasted the precise duration required to communicate that the moment was his to end. You should know. He said that there is a version of Mr. Colburn's history in this county that differs somewhat from the version he's likely given you. He said it without inflection, the way you might mention a fact of weather. I'd simply suggest that a woman in your position, new to this community making certain arrangements, might benefit from a fuller picture. I generally find I benefit from accurate pictures, she said. I'm less concerned with fuller ones. He smiled again, touched the brim of his hat, turned and walked down the porch steps and up the road toward his office, with the unhurried gait of a man who had nowhere urgent to be, because everywhere, more or less, was already his. She stood on the porch until he was out of sight. Then she went inside and sat down at the breakfast table and did not eat for a moment, and let herself understand exactly what had just happened. He was not threatening her. He was informing her. He was letting her know that he had a version of Seth Colburn that he could deploy at a time of his choosing, and that she had not yet been given access to it, and that this created a vulnerability in her position. It was a sophisticated move. The move of a man who had done this before. She thought about that. She thought about the way he had said it. Not what he'd said, which was nothing specific, but the certainty behind it. The ease of a man who believed the information he held was more powerful than the person receiving the news. She had met men like that before. The ones who underestimated what you could handle were always more useful than they intended to be. She ate her breakfast. She thought about the boots and the auction, and the 8 years between the losing and the returning. She thought about the patience required for that. She went upstairs and wrote in her notebook, "He has waited 8 years. He is not improvising." Then she went to find Ezra Tull. He was at the hotel, which was the only other establishment in Delwood that offered accommodation, and which he had chosen, she assumed, because it was on the opposite end of the main road from Cora's, and because a man who did not want to be observed meeting certain people needed to be somewhere. Those people might plausibly arrive from multiple directions without it appearing deliberate. She sat across from him at the small corner table he had positioned, facing the door, and told him about her morning, including the part about Voss's boots, which was the part he found most useful. She could tell, because it was the part that made him stop being performatively relaxed. He was at the auction, he said, 8 years before he came to Delwood. Under what name, I don't know yet. He lost. Ezra Tull looked at the table. He made a small decision. She could see it happening about how much to give her. Before he could speak, she said, "You used my name yesterday, before I gave it to you." He looked at her, set his coffee cup down. "The station master," he said. "I asked him who'd arrived on the afternoon train. He described you well enough." A pause. "I should have mentioned it." "You should have," she agreed. She looked at him steadily. "Go ahead." He drew a breath. "My name is Ezra Tull, and I am a lawyer. Those things are true. I'm not a private investigator. I was retained 2 years ago by a man in Creede, Colorado, named Foster Webb, who lost a mining claim in 1881 under circumstances similar to what is happening here. Fraudulent documentation challenged legal delay sale under duress, subsequent departure. He looked at her directly. Foster Webb sold his claim for 1/3 of its value to avoid a prolonged and expensive legal fight. He believed he could not win. 6 months after he left, the claim was resold at full market value to a regional mining concern. Harlan Voss received a commission. He's done this before, twice that I can document. Creede in 1881, Salida in 1884. Both times a property with undervalued resource potential. Both times a legal challenge that was never entirely solid, but was expensive and exhausting to fight. Both times the original owner left. Both times Voss profited. She looked at him. And both times what happened to the people who might have testified. He met her look without evasion. "Webb is willing to testify. He's in Creede. The other man, the one from Salida, moved east. I haven't located him. So, you have Webb and you have a pattern. I have Webb and a pattern. What I don't have is a witness in Delwood who can speak to the current matter from personal knowledge and who will still be in Delwood when this comes to court." He paused. "If Seth Colburn sells or loses the property through legal action and leaves, I have nothing. And if he stays and testifies, then I have 3 instances with 2 witnesses and a documented pattern which is enough to take to the federal court in Denver." He folded his hands on the table. "Miss Calloway, I want to be direct with you because I believe you are a person for whom directness is more efficient than the alternative. If Seth Colburn makes his stand here, and I can support it with what I have from Creede, there is a reasonable chance of stopping Voss permanently. If Colburn is pressured out before the case is made, Voss moves on. There will be another property, Another man who built something Voss wants. You're asking him to take the risk of losing everything in order to stop something from happening to someone else. I'm asking him to take that risk in order to keep what he has, Ezra said. The benefit to others is secondary. I'm not a moralist. I'm a lawyer. She looked at him for a long moment. He did not look away. What don't you have, she said, that you'd need? Time, he said. If Voss accelerates the court action, the timeline compresses. I need Colburn's testimony on record before Voss's challenge goes to the county judge, because once the county judge rules, even a favorable federal case won't restore what's lost in the interim. He picked up his coffee cup. I also need Colburn to know that making his stand is not only the act of a man defending himself. It's the act of a man contributing to something larger than his fence line. He won't care about something larger than his fence line, Wren said. Not the way you mean it. Ezra looked at her. He cares about what he built, she said. He cares about what it cost him to build it. If you want him to testify, don't tell him about Foster Webb. Tell him about what Voss will do to the next man after him. She paused. Those are different things to Seth Colburn. Ezra was quiet. He was, she realized, revising his estimate again. You've known him 2 days, he said. I read his letters for 4 months, she said. They were specific letters. She went to Seth that evening. She had asked Cora to send word ahead that she was coming, which she had done because showing up at a man's home unannounced on consecutive days was a different thing from showing up once, and she was careful about the difference between the two. He was on the porch when she arrived, which meant he had been watching for her, which she noted without drawing any large conclusions. They sat on the porch steps, which were better than the chairs, because the chairs were inside, and the inside of his house was still, in some technical sense, not hers to occupy without consideration. The evening was coming in cool, and the first stars were appearing in the east, where the sky was already going deep. And she told him about Ezra Tull without theater. Everything Tull had told her, and watched Seth's face as she did. He listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he was quiet for long enough that a bird settled in the cottonwood near the barn and called once and left. He wants me to testify, Seth said. He needs you to. Webb from Creed is willing, but he's one voice from a different county. You're here. Your land, your records, your direct experience of what Voss is doing. And if the federal case doesn't hold, then you will have testified and it won't have been enough. And Voss will know your name in a federal record. She said it plainly because there was no honest alternative. Tull didn't underrepresent the risk. He was direct about it. Seth looked out at the land. She could see him looking at the fence line, the straightness of it against the darkening sky, and she thought she understood something about what it meant to look at something you had built with your own hands and consider the possibility of its loss. There's something I didn't tell you at the well, he said. The woman I mentioned. That she didn't stay. Wren waited. She didn't leave because she stopped caring about me, he said. Or not mainly. She left because someone convinced her that I was a lesser prospect than she'd been led to believe. That what I was building wasn't going to hold. He turned the information over the way he had turned the small stone at the well. The person who convinced her was my brother, younger than me. He knew what to say and how to say it, and he said it when I wasn't there to offer a different account. He stopped. She married him 3 years later. I found out by accident. She said nothing for a moment. What Cora had described a man who had been taught by someone close to him that letting people in led to damage had just acquired its precise shape. How long ago, she said. 20 years. He did not say it with grief exactly, with the careful distance of something examined many times from many angles and finally placed where it could not be stepped on. I've had 2 decades of thinking that if I'd done something differently in that moment, if I'd been there, if I'd spoken first, if I'd argued, it would have ended differently. Maybe it would have. Maybe it wouldn't. He looked at the porch boards. What I know is that I didn't argue. I closed the door and moved west and told myself that was dignity. It wasn't. It was fear wearing dignity's coat. She looked at the stars which had increased while they were talking. The woman I married, she said, and felt him become very still beside her. Managed his finances in ways I didn't know about for the last 4 years of our marriage. I found out after he died when the men came with the ledgers. I'd kept our household accounts for a decade and thought I understood the shape of our situation. I didn't understand anything. He'd built a parallel accounting that I had no access to, and when it collapsed onto me. She paused. I paid it. Every dollar. It took me 2 years. After that, I had $47 and a very clear sense of what happens when you let someone else be responsible for the arithmetic of your life. Seth said nothing. He was, she understood, receiving this the way she had received his, as the thing that explained the other things. I came here, she said, with 3 conditions in a sealed envelope and a notebook full of calculations. I read your letters like contracts. I designed this arrangement to be survivable if everything went wrong. She looked at the stars. That's not trust. I know it's not trust. It's the best imitation of it I knew how to make. It's more than I had to offer, he said. That's not a particularly high bar. A sound that was not quite a laugh moved through him, just a shift in his breathing, a slight relenting. She heard it and understood it for what it was. They sat for a while in the cooling dark, not touching, not performing anything for anyone, just present on the same porch with the same stars overhead and the same difficult personal histories arranged around them, like furniture that didn't quite fit the room, but that you had stopped being able to imagine living without. She stood eventually, because she needed to walk back before it was fully dark. He stood too. They faced each other for a moment in the way that people face each other. When a conversation has taken them somewhere neither of them entirely planned to go. The testimony, she said. Tull needs to know soon. I'll think about it. I know. I'm not pushing. She picked up her jacket from the step. But you should know that Voss paid me a visit this morning. He mentioned having a different version of your history. He said it like a man who believes the information he holds is more powerful than what it actually contains. Seth looked at her. What do you think it contains? The same things you've told me, probably arranged differently. She looked at him, which tells me he hasn't found anything you haven't already accounted for. He looked at her steadily. Good night, Seth, she said. Good night, Wren. It was the first time he had used her name. It was, she noticed, used with the same care he used for everything else deliberately, because he intended to. She walked back to Delwood in the dark, with the stars considerable overhead, and the dry grass whispering at the road's edges. And she thought about 3 conditions written in her own hand, in a sealed envelope that she had carried 4 days on 3 trains. And she thought about what it would mean to open the envelope, and she thought that she was not ready to answer that question yet, but that she was closer to it than she had been at the station, when she had stood on the platform, with her valise and the absence of anyone waiting, and made the same quiet decision she had always made, which was to begin. She went to bed early. She did not sleep well, not because she was troubled, but because she was thinking in the particular way that real thinking feels when it's working. And real thinking rarely had the courtesy to wait until morning. She was still in that productive, not quite sleep, when she heard sometime past midnight the sound of a rider coming hard down the road outside, too hard for the hour, the hoofbeats carrying the urgency of news that cannot be delivered at a walk. She was dressed and at the top of the stairs before Cora had reached the door. The rider was Seth's hand, a young man named Cole, who worked the fence line in the barn, and he was breathing the way people breathe when they have ridden fast, and also when they have seen something unexpected. And what he had seen was this 3 miles west of the ranch in the open land near the dry creek bed, where the ground had been marked last summer, with small flags showing where a certain survey had been conducted. He had found a horse standing alone in the dark, and near the horse, in a hollow made by an old erosion, he had found a man. The man was Harlan Voss. He was alive. His leg was broken, bent at an angle that was not an angle, and he had been there by the look of it since sometime the previous evening, and the night temperatures in Colorado in September did what they always did, and the water he had been carrying was long gone, and there was no water for 3 miles in any direction except one. Cora looked at Wren. Wren looked at Cora. Cole looked at both of them, and then said the part he had clearly been composing the whole ride over. "Mr. Colburn knows. He's the one sent me. He didn't say what he was going to do." A pause. "But he was putting on his boots when I left." Seth was sitting at his kitchen table when she arrived, not preparing, not packing supplies or consulting maps or doing any of the things a man is supposed to be doing when the night has delivered him a decision. He was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee that had been made hours ago and had long since gone cold, and his hands were around it in the loose way of someone who had picked it up for warmth and found there was none and had not yet put it down. She had ridden with Cole on the spare horse because she had asked, and Cole had not been in a position to refuse, and because 3 miles in the dark was not something she intended to walk when there was an alternative. She came through the door without knocking, and he looked up and did not appear surprised, which meant he had heard the horses, or had expected her, or both. The lamp on the table was turned low. The room held the specific quiet of very late hours, when the world outside has finished its business, and everything that remains is interior. She sat down in the other chair. She did not ask him what he was thinking. She did not tell him what he should do. She had said her piece over 2 days, and what remained now was not hers to fill. Cole stood in the doorway for a moment looking at both of them, and then made the intelligent decision to go see to the horses. The clock on the shelf marked a minute, then another. The coffee in Seth's cup had been cold for a long time. He drank it anyway, the way you drink something when what you need is the gesture of it, rather than the thing itself, and set the cup down on the table with a precision that was not deliberate but was entirely characteristic. Then he stood up. He went to the hook by the door where his jacket was and then to the shelf where his medical supplies were kept. Not a large collection, but organized the linen strips, folded the carbolic in its brown bottle. The splinting boards she had not noticed on her previous visits because they were behind the larger items, and visible only to someone who knew to look. He took them down and placed them in the canvas bag he kept for fence work and similar purposes. He went to the water shelf and took the 2 full canteens. Then he turned to her. "You know how to splint a broken leg," he said. It was the question from 2 nights ago, repeated now as a statement, as if he had been holding it somewhere practical. "I do. The break will be bad. He's been there since yesterday evening. I understand." He looked at her for a moment. In the low lamplight, his face was unreadable in the way that faces are unreadable when the person wearing them has arrived somewhere past the need for expression. He was not angry. He was not resolved in any heroic sense. He was simply a man who had finished sitting down. "The survey flags are out there," he said. "The ones from 1879. I put them back last spring to remind myself where the aquifer formation runs, in case I needed to dig a secondary well." He looked at the bag in his hand. "I know where he is." "Then let's go," she said. They rode west with Cole ahead, carrying the lantern, and the dark was vast and close at the same time, the stars doing what they always did in country, without competing light, which was to say too much. She rode behind Seth and Cole, and looked at the back of Seth's shoulders, and thought about the 20 minutes he had spent at that table with the cold coffee. She had arrived from Cora's in under 30 minutes from when Cole had knocked, and she had not wasted time, which meant Seth had been sitting there before Cole returned, had been sitting there since the news arrived, and had not moved for those 20 minutes. She understood what those 20 minutes were. They were not hesitation. They were not weakness. They were the time it took for a man to look at the thing he was about to do and understand exactly what it was and was not, and to agree to do it anyway. Not from impulse, but from something slower and more durable. You could not force that. You could not argue someone into it or persuade them or construct a sufficient case. It had to arrive on its own in its own time, and then the man put on his boots. The survey flags appeared in Cole's lantern light as small white markers in the dark ground, stakes with narrow cloth tied at the top, precise in their placement, arranged in the pattern of someone who had been systematic about what they were recording. She counted 6 visible from the saddle. The formation they marked was not a guess. It was documented evidence of care. The hollow was another 100 yards west. She heard the horse before she saw it, a dark shape standing apart from the darkness, head down, ground-tied by accident or exhaustion, to nothing in particular. The horse looked up when the lantern swung toward it and blinked without alarm, which told her it had been standing there long enough to be bored. Voss was in the hollow. He was on his back with his head propped against the slope of the depression, which he had managed himself, which meant he was conscious and had some use of his upper body. His right leg was at an angle that told the story immediately and told it badly. He had his jacket over him, which was sensible, and he was very still in the way of someone who had learned over hours exactly which position minimized the thing they were managing. He heard them coming. He turned his head. In the lantern light, Harlan Voss looked like a man who had been reduced to his actual dimensions. The vest was still buttoned, which struck her as almost admirable in its futility. His face had the quality of someone who had been in pain for a long time, not collapsed by it. Because that kind of man did not collapse easily, but marked by it, the bones showing more prominently the careful performance of his usual self suspended for the night. He saw Seth. What moved across his face then was not relief, and it was not gratitude. It was something older and more complicated, the expression of a man who has had many hours to consider the specific irony of his situation and has arrived at no comfortable resolution. Cole hung the lantern on the stake of the nearest survey flag and stood back. Seth came down into the hollow and crouched beside Voss and looked at the leg without touching it, making his assessment in the efficient way of someone who has seen broken things before and knows what the examination requires. The fibula at minimum, he said to Wren rather than to Voss. Possibly the tibia as well, given the angle. We'll need to stabilize before moving him, she said. She came down into the hollow and opened the canvas bag, and they worked. This was the part that had no drama in it, or a different kind. Not the drama of confrontation or decision, but the quiet intensity of two people doing a necessary thing with their hands in difficult conditions. She held the boards while he bound them. She passed the linen strips in the order he needed them. The canteen of water went to Voss first, who drank with the focused desperation of someone who has been counting hours. Voss made no sound during the splinting. This was not easy, and the not making sound was a choice which she registered without comment. Whatever else he was not a man who performed weakness. When it was done and the leg was stable enough for moving, Seth sat back on his heels and looked at Voss and did not say anything immediately. Voss looked at him. Cole's lantern made their shadows long against the hollow's walls. "Colburn," Voss said. His voice had the quality of paper that had gotten wet and dried out wrong. "Don't talk yet," Seth said. "Give the water a few more minutes." The patience of that, the simple, practical patience was, she thought, the strangest and most telling thing she had seen Seth do. He was not delaying the conversation. He was not denying Voss the chance to speak. He was simply accounting for the fact that a man who had been without water for 18 hours needed a few minutes before his voice was reliable. The care was not warmth. It was something more basic and less personal than warmth, which was precisely what made it remarkable. Voss drank again, handed the canteen back. "You know I went out there to destroy the markers," he said. His voice was steadier now. He was looking at Seth directly, which appeared to be a choice. "The survey flags. I know. You see your horse, you know. You track back to see what spooked it." He looked at the nearest flag, the one with the lantern hanging from it. "Your own flags." "Yes." Voss looked at the splinting on his leg, at the linen strips, the boards, the careful binding. "You understand I will not." He stopped, reconsidered the phrasing. "I don't change Colburn. What I've built in this county, the arrangements I have a legal case, doesn't unmake that. Even if Tull has what he thinks he has." "I know," Seth said. Then why? It was not quite a question. It was the thing a man asks when he has spent 18 hours in a hollow with a broken leg and has had sufficient time to examine the available possibilities and cannot from any angle construct a satisfying logic for the one that actually occurred. Seth stood up from his crouch. He stood in the hollow with the survey flags around him and the lantern light catching the lines of his face, and he looked at Harlan Voss with the steadiness of a man who has in the last hour passed through something and come out the other side of it and knows the difference. "That's not why I came," he said. He held out his hand to help Voss up. Voss looked at it, looked at Seth's face, took it. The ride back was slow, which it had to be. Cole rode ahead with the lantern and Seth rode beside Voss to keep him from falling. And Wren rode behind them and watched the stars do their unremarkable work overhead and thought about the question Voss had asked and the answer Seth had given, and the weight of 4 words that refused to explain themselves but required no explanation. She thought about what Seth had said on the porch. I closed the door and moved west and told myself that was dignity. It wasn't. It was fear wearing dignity's coat. She thought he is not afraid of this anymore, not of this specific thing. She thought about whether that was what 20 minutes of cold coffee produced, when the 20 minutes were done by the right person at the right time. She was inclined to think it was not the coffee. By the time they reached Delwood, the sky was beginning the long argument with itself that preceded morning, a grayness in the east that was not yet light, but was the promise of it honest, in the way that promising only what you can deliver is honest. She left Seth and Cole to deal with the arrangements, the doctor who would need to be woke in the office where Voss would need to be delivered in some official sense, the horse which needed water and was probably wondering what it had done to deserve its evening. She walked back to Cora's. Cora was awake. Cora, she was coming to understand, was always awake when something was happening within a half-mile radius of her establishment, which was less supernatural intuition than a life spent with one ear always available. She sat down at the kitchen table and Cora put tea in front of her without comment and sat across from her, and they looked at each other in the early gray light. "He went," Cora said. "He went. And Voss, alive, broken leg. They've taken him to the doctor." She wrapped her hands around the tea. "He'll recover." Cora nodded as if this confirmed something. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Did Seth say anything?" "He said it wasn't why he went." Cora looked at her. "When Voss asked him why," Wren said, "Seth said it wasn't why he went." Cora looked at her tea. Something in her expression was the expression of a woman who had been watching Seth Colburn from a careful distance for 8 years and had just received information she had not been sure was coming. "No," Cora said. "I don't imagine it was." She went upstairs and slept. When she woke, it was past noon and the room was full of flat gray light, the kind that meant clouds had come in during the hours she was not watching. She lay still for a few minutes and thought about the hollow, about the angle of the lantern light on the survey flags, about the 4 words Seth had said, and what they had cost him to mean. She did not try to analyze them further. Some things required a period of simply holding before they could be understood, and she had learned over the last 3 years to give things that time. She washed her face and went downstairs. Tull was sitting at Cora's front table with his hat on his knee, and an expression she had not seen on him before, which was the expression of a man who has had an outcome he was not entirely prepared for. "He went out there," Tull said. "Yes. He did it before I had the chance to speak with him about the testimony." "Yes." Tull looked at his hat. He turned it in his hands once, which was the closest to fidgeting she had seen him come. "Voss's claim," she said, "and what you're building against him, those are separate questions from what Seth did last night. I want to be clear about that. I understand. He didn't go out there because of your case. He didn't go out there to strengthen his position or compromise Voss's, or because someone made a sufficient argument about it." "I know," Tull said. "That's what I understand that." He set the hat on the table. "I'm trying to determine what it means for the case." "Voss will recover," she said. "He'll be here. He'll still have the legal challenge in process. The timeline hasn't changed. Seth will still need to testify." "I know. Has he said he will?" She looked at Tull steadily. "Have you asked him?" Tull picked up his hat. He stood. He had the look of a man reordering certain assumptions. "I'll speak with him," he said. "Yes," she said, "but give him today." Tull looked at her. "He's been awake all night," she said. "And he has things to do with the information from last night before he's available to be useful to anyone else's purposes. Give him today." Tull held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded, once the nod of a man who has learned over the course of 3 days not to push certain people. He went. She found Seth at the fence again, which she was beginning to understand was where he went when he was thinking, because the fence required enough physical attention to occupy the part of the mind that would otherwise interrupt the part that was doing the real work. It was late afternoon. The light was doing the amber thing again. The hawk, or one of its relatives, was present in the distance, turning slow circles against the pale sky. She walked the fence line to where he was and stopped, and he looked up and drove the staple he was holding into the post before he spoke. "Tull came to see me," he said. "I told him to give you today. He waited until afternoon." He picked up another staple. "I told him I'd testify." She looked at him. "It's not complicated," he said. "Voss will be back at his desk in 6 weeks, maybe 8. He'll still have the legal challenge. He'll still have his arrangements in this county. And if I leave or don't fight it, the next man he comes for won't have anyone who can speak to the pattern." He held the staple against the post positioned. "I built this fence because I intended to be here. I might as well be here in a way that means something." "You sound like Tull." Tull made a reasonable argument. The argument being reasonable doesn't mean I'm doing it for Tull. He drove the staple in. "I'm doing it because Voss told me last night he doesn't change, and he was telling me that as a threat, and I found I didn't care anymore. I've been afraid of the specific shape of that for 20 years, and last night I found I wasn't afraid of it." She stood with that for a moment. "That's not something you arrived at last night," she said. "That came from somewhere." He looked at the fence. "Some of it from before last night," he agreed. some of it from the last 3 days. He did not look at her when he said it. He did not need to. She took her notebook from her pocket, opened it to a blank page, wrote the date the agreement to testify the approximate timeline Tull had given her for the federal process. She wrote it because it was part of the record and the record mattered. Then she closed the notebook and put it in her pocket and stood beside him for a while, without speaking, which she was finding to be one of the more reliable modes of communication available to the two of them. After a while, she said, "There's something in my valise I want to show you. Not now. When we're done here." He glanced at her. You have 6 more posts on this section," she said, "and I'm standing here." He handed her the staple bucket. They finished the section in the hour before dark, working in the efficient quiet that had begun to characterize the time they spent together. The kind of quiet that requires 2 people to have arrived at a similar temperature, which takes time and cannot be manufactured. She had not planned to show him the envelope tonight. She had been keeping it in mind for some time, the sealed envelope with its 3 conditions and its declaration across the front, terms agreed, and she had not known when the right moment was. She had only known that the right moment was not one she could schedule in advance. It arrived the way right moments typically did, without announcement, while they were washing the tools under the pump by the barn, the water cold from the ground. She went to the house and got the valise, and brought it back to the porch where the last of the light was sufficient. She found the envelope, the smaller one, the one she had carried from Philadelphia as evidence. She held it for a moment. Then she took the pencil from her jacket pocket. She opened the flap which she had sealed herself 4 months ago, and took out the single folded sheet, and opened it on her knee. 3 conditions written in her clearest hand, numbered each one precise. She had composed them over 3 evenings in the boarding house room where she had lived after the creditors were satisfied, and before she decided what came next. He stood by the porch rail and watched her, but did not ask. She drew a line through the first condition, then the second, then the third. She folded the paper, put it back in the envelope, and set the envelope on the porch rail between them. He looked at it. He looked at her. "I wrote those because I needed to arrive somewhere survivable," she said. "I needed to know the ground could hold me, regardless of what happened. I needed the arithmetic to work before I'd allow anything else. And now, the arithmetic still works," she said. "That hasn't changed. I didn't cross those out because I don't need them anymore." She looked at the envelope. "I crossed them out because they were the wrong question. I was asking how to protect myself from this. That's not the question." "What's the question?" She looked at him. The light was almost gone. His face in the dusk was the face she had been reading for 3 days, learning its registers and its economies, and she thought she could read it reasonably well now. She thought she could read what it was doing at this moment. "Whether I want to try," she said. "Not whether I can survive it. Whether I want it." He was quiet. The evening sounds of the ranch settling into night moved around them. The horses in the barn, the dry grass, the silence of land that had been worked and was resting. "Do you?" he said. "I'm standing on your porch with a pencil and a defaced document," she said. "Make of that what you will." The thing that had come close to happening in his face at various points over the past 3 days happened now. All of it at once, quietly, with the complete absence of drama that characterized Seth Colburn's relationship with every important thing. It was not a smile exactly, or not only. It was the expression of a man who has been carrying something for a long time and has in a single moment been given permission to put it down. He picked up the envelope, looked at it, turned it over. He put it in his jacket pocket. She watched him do it. Something she had been carrying rearranged itself, and she let it. The hearing was held 8 weeks later in the county courthouse 20 miles north, before a judge who approached the task with the methodical seriousness of a man who understood that what he was looking at was not a single property dispute, but a pattern that had been moving across the state for 6 years, looking for people who could not fight back. Seth testified for 2 hours. He brought the original deed, the survey documentation, the letter from Hargreave confirming his engagement and its date, and a hand-drawn map of the aquifer formation that he had made himself from the survey findings which the judge examined for a long time. He answered questions precisely, did not embellish, did not deflect. He was a good witness in the way that made lawyers comfortable and juries attentive. Tull presented the pattern. 3 properties, 3 legal challenges, 3 profitable departures. The boots at the auction in 1879. The 8-year wait. The timing of the claim against Seth relative to the aquifer's value in drought conditions. Foster Webb's affidavit from Creed arrived by courier, 3 pages of plain documented fact. The judge took 2 weeks to issue his ruling. He ruled for Seth on every point. The western parcel and the water rights remained. The claim was dismissed. The federal court in Denver took the broader case under advisement, which meant that what Voss had been doing across 3 counties was now part of an official record that his method of operation could no longer easily ignore. Tull came to the ranch the evening the ruling was delivered. He shook Seth's hand, nodded to Wren, stayed for 1 cup of coffee, and did not overstay it. After he left, Seth stood on the porch and looked at the land in the early evening, and Wren stood beside him and looked at the same land, and neither of them said much because the moment did not require it. That was in November. In November, the rains came back. Not dramatically, not the kind of rainfall that ends droughts in stories, the torrential conclusion that washes everything clean and makes the moral clear. The rains came back the way they had left, gradually, in increments, the way things actually return when they return honestly. A day of light rain, a week of gray sky with intermittent effort, then a solid 2 days of weather that meant something. The creek bed was still dry at the end of November, but the ground had begun to absorb what it was being given, and the color of things was changing in the way that living things change when they have been given what they needed for long enough. Wren had been in Delwood for 11 weeks when the rains began. She had taken over the ranch accounts in her 4th week because no one had been keeping them properly, and they needed keeping properly. And Seth had signed the paper she put in front of him without apparent concern for what she would find in them, which she took as an accurate reflection of the degree to which his situation was precisely what he had said it was. She had also, in her 7th week, begun a letter to Margaret Prentice about the possibility of establishing a small lending library in the schoolhouse, because the school had no library and there were 12 books in Seth's house that he had read multiple times and that other people might benefit from. And because this was the kind of project that rooted a person in a place in ways that were not romantic but were real and lasting. Margaret Prentice had responded with enthusiasm that suggested she had been waiting for someone to propose this for some time and had not known how to begin. Cora had said, when Wren mentioned the library project, "You're staying." And Wren had said, "I'm staying." And Cora had nodded in the way of a woman whose estimate of a situation has been confirmed, and poured them both more coffee. On the first day of December in the morning, Seth took her to the well. He had not said where they were going. He had simply suggested after breakfast that she might want her coat and led her west across the land that was showing the earliest evidence of what the rains were doing to it. Small presences of green at the base of the brown grass, barely visible, requiring attention to see. She had worn her boots, the good ones, and she noticed he had noticed, which was the kind of small notice they had accumulated without remark. Over 11 weeks, the inventory of a shared life built one specific ordinary thing at a time. The well looked the same. It would look the same in any weather, which was its nature. The stone was damp from recent rain. The rope was dark with it. He lowered the bucket. The sound of water. He drew it up. The water was as clear as it had been in September, as cold, as entirely indifferent to everything that had happened above it, while it did what it had always done. He poured it into the cup and held it out. She drank. Still cold. Still the same. "The formation will have recharged some," he said. He was looking at the hills to the west, reading something she was not yet able to read. Not fully. A drought that goes 3 years doesn't resolve in a month. But the direction is right. How long to fully recover? Another year of average rain. Maybe 2. He looked at the sky, which was the gray of actual clouds, promising clouds. If the pattern holds. Does the pattern hold? Not always, he said, but sometimes. She gave him back the cup. He dried it on his jacket the way he always did and clipped it back to the crosspiece. She stood at the edge of the well and looked down into the dark circle of it, and thought about 40 feet of sandstone that did not care about the surface, about the long patience of water that knew how to wait. She thought about 3 conditions with lines drawn through them, folded in an envelope in a jacket pocket. She thought about a woman who had arrived at a train platform in September with a valise, and the absence of anyone waiting, and had stood there for a moment with the expression of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by the specific shape that absence took, and had then picked up her bag and asked for directions. She thought about the arithmetic of the last 11 weeks, which did not resolve into a single number, but into something more like a shape, a set of relationships between things that were now part of the same calculation, in a way they had not been before. Beside her, Seth was quiet in the way he was quiet when he was present. Rather than absent, there was a difference she had learned, and she could now identify it reliably. "The accounts show a reasonable position going into winter," she said, because this was true and worth saying. "Assuming feed costs stay where they are, and the herd holds you, come out of spring in better shape than last year." "We," he said. She looked at him. "You said you." He was looking at the hills still, or the sky. "The accounts show we come out of spring in better shape." She stood with that for a moment, turned it over. The way she turned things over when they required more than immediate acceptance. "We," she said. The clouds to the north had the weight of something genuine in them. She had been learning to read weather from him the way she had learned to read the fence line and the condition of the pasture and the mood of the pump in the morning's information available to anyone who paid attention, which she did. "It'll rain again today," he said. "How long?" "Not long. An hour, maybe." He looked at the ground near the well at the small markers of the survey flags, still there, standing exactly where he had placed them in the spring. "Enough to matter." She nodded. The air had the smell of it, that particular dry earth smell that preceded rain in this country. The smell of ground that had been waiting and was about to receive something. Seth Colburn looked at the sky over Colorado in the 1st of December, and Wren Calloway stood beside him, and neither of them spoke for a while, which was no longer the silence of two people who did not yet know each other well enough to fill it, but the silence of two people who did not need to, which is a different kind of quiet entirely. He had been alone in this place for 8 years. He had built the fence and the barn and maintained the well and kept the accounts badly and done all of it without asking anyone for anything, and had told himself this was sufficient and had been mostly right and had been wrong in one specific way that he had not wanted to examine. She had come 4 days on 3 trains with a sealed envelope and 3 conditions in a notebook full of arithmetic, and had arrived at a platform where no one was waiting and had picked up her bag and asked which direction to walk. She had been making that particular calculation how to survive what comes next, how to keep the ground under her, how to not be caught by the arithmetic she hadn't been allowed to see for 3 years. And she had gotten very good at it, and had been right to, and had been wrong in one specific way that she was now, with considerable deliberation, beginning to correct. Somewhere in the northwest, the sky made the sound it makes when it is finally decided. The first drops fell on the sandstone edge of the well, on the survey flags, on the dry grass that was no longer entirely dry, on the fence posts he had set himself, and the fence line she had helped him finish on the land that had been his, and was becoming theirs in the specific, unhurried way that things become theirs when two people have stopped designing for survival and started building for something longer than that. She turned her face up to it for a moment. The rain was cold and light, and entirely honest about what it was. He did the same. This was not a conclusion. It was not the end of anything that had been difficult, or the resolution of everything that remained to be done. The accounts would need tending in the morning. The library project was still mostly a letter. The land still carried 3 years of drought in its subsoil, and would for some time. Harlan Voss was still in Delwood, healing with his arrangements and his long memory. The federal case in Denver was still being assembled and would take the time that it required. The aquifer, 40 feet below them, was still refilling at the rate of sandstone, which was patient and did not hurry. None of it was finished. Very little of it was simple. But she was standing next to him in the rain at the edge of a well that held water regardless of what happened above it, and he was standing next to her in the same rain, and neither of them was going anywhere. That was the arithmetic of it. That was what the water knew.